Can you start by telling me about your new book, The Lost Art of Silence?
Yes, it's taken a very long time to get to publication. It's something I've been playing around with for many years, but we live in such an incredibly noisy world. And I really do think that most creativity, doesn't matter what it is, if it's painting, writing, composing music, or just listed. Well, music, I mean, that sounds odd, in that music obviously isn't silent. But funnily enough, one of the things in the book that I did was talk to a lot of musicians, and they said it's the silence during the music which is the most important thing. Anyway, I do think that creativity needs silence. And so that was one of the reasons I embarked on the book.
When is it launching and who is it published by?
It's being published by Shambhala in America, and the publication date is December the 5th. And in the UK, Shambhala is distributed by Penguin Random House. So they're a very good distributor. So I'm hoping that it'll be in every bookshop here.
What inspired you to write this book and how did you find the writing process?
Well, as I said, it took a very long time. I think one of the key moments was in 2005, I think it was. I went to the Antarctic, and which I'd always wanted to do. It was number one on my list. And while we were there, we were on a big Russian icebreaker. We got off one day and I got into small zodiacs, and we were zooming in and out of the icebergs. And then he turned the engine off, and then it began to snow, and it was completely silent. And I think that was really the inspiration. I'll never, ever get that moment back, but I've got the memory of it.
Can you tell me a bit about the other books you've written?
Yes, I started the Travel Bookshop in 1979. And I was asked to write a book, which was really a book of the shop. The bookshop was arranged under country, and under that country, it had every subject. So it had fiction as well as guides and maps and histories and biographies and natural history. And so I was asked to do a book in that same way, published by Scholar Press, and it was called Anderson's Travel Companion. And actually, it would be an ideal thing to have online, but it was long before the days when that was a possibility. So that was my first book. And then Virago asked me to do a book of women travelers. So I said yes. And then literally the day after I signed the contract, they said, sorry, we don't want it anymore because we've had a manuscript sent from America. And so they said, think of another topic. So I thought of women's spirituality. And so that was published in the 90s at some point. It's called the Virago Book of Women's Spirituality. In America, it was called Heaven's Face Thinly Veiled. And that was actually done by Shambhala, my current publisher, back then. So I had a bit of history with them, which was good. Then the famous film Notting Hill was based on my bookshop. And so myself and a friend of mine, Miranda Davis, thought that since there was very much more to Notting Hill than the film, we'd do a book on Notting Hill. So we did a book called Inside Notting Hill, which was walks around the area and interesting essays that people wrote, especially for the book. And that actually I did fantastically well in Notting Hill.
How did you find writing an autobiography?
Well, the reason, the trigger is that I only have one arm. And so really I wanted to write about what it's like having one arm. And I looked at history and people who've had one arm and how they've dealt with it. And in fact, there are also in literature. So I found that actually very easy to write. And I really wanted to let people know what it felt like. And it got some really very nice reviews, actually. So I was very pleased with that.
How did your bookshop being the centre of the very famous film Notting Hill impact the visibility of your bookshop and sales?
Well, the visibility of the bookshop soared, as you can imagine, and still, even today, anywhere I go in the world and I say, you know, I had the Travel Bookshop, which featured in the film Notting Hill, and people go absolutely bananas and want to take my photograph. And so from the fame point of view, fantastic. From the business point of view, not necessarily. I mean, there were hordes of people who used to come to the shop, but they never bought books. I mean, we were on the Japanese coach tour of London, and we had to stop them coming in because 50 Japanese would suddenly arrive and not buy books. But anyway, so fame, yes, but not financial.
Did
Anyway.
you meet interesting people when you were running the bookshop?
Oh, yes. I was very lucky. As I said, I started it in about 1979. And at the beginning of the 80s was really the golden age of modern travel writing. So there was Bruce Chatwin, Jonathan Raban, Paul Theroux, Colin Soubron, Norman Lewis, and they were all writing then. So I got to know them all and many more besides. So yeah, it was fantastic. And the other thing which happened to me is I'd never actually written myself. And in the late 80s, somebody suggested that I go to Sri Lanka to write a piece for a magazine called Departures, which was the American Express magazine. And so I did that. And that was the start of my writing career. And it meant then that anytime I went traveling, I could ring up an editor who I got to know, and I would do a travel piece for them. So that was also fantastic.
Any plans for any new books? Have you thought of another book you want to write?
Well, funnily enough, there's a woman who no one in England has heard of called Mary Austin, who lived at the turn of the, how do you say it, in about 1900 anyway, in the southwest of America. And she was an extraordinary woman. I think she was a mathematician, a philosopher, a novelist, and she was interested in the environment. And as I say, there is nothing by her in this country. I think a few of her books still in print in America. I'd like to, not a full biography, but I'd quite like to try and do something about her. Yeah. And I'm trying to write a thriller as well at the moment. So
you're not writing, and when you weren't running your bookshop, what else do you do in your spare time?
I paint. I've had a few exhibitions. And Shambhala want to do something with my paintings for the book. I'm not quite sure how they want to make one into a print, I think.
Oh, wow.
I'm not quite sure what they're going to do with it, which is a really original idea. I love that idea.
What sort of things do you paint?
Well, anything. I'm actually going to Japan in November, just before the book comes out, on a painting trip. So I will be painting things Japanese. I paint still lifes. I don't paint portraits. I was on a painting course in Dorset earlier this summer. It's another landscape. And so landscape and still lives, really, I suppose. And I do quite a lot of collage.
Finally, what is the best book you've read in the last year and why?
Well, the problem at the moment, I don't know about the last year, is that I'm a reader for a literary prize, First Biography Prize, which means that I'm having to read about 50 books that I've been sent, which are first biographies or memoirs. So I haven't actually read a book that I want to read for really quite a long time. Although I have to say that I've sneaked, because I think your next question might be, what's my favorite book or something like that. I've sneaked onto my Kindle a book called Haunts of the Black Masseur, which is by somebody called Charles Sprawson, which is about swimming. And it's a book I absolutely love. And so I read small bits of that when I'm fed up with reading other people's memoirs. So this is not the year to ask me what I'm reading. So.
If you can think of all time, do you have a favorite book that comes to mind?
Oh, it's very difficult. As I say, I love this book, Haunts of the Black Masseur. It's a very strange title, isn't it? But I find that a very difficult question because I've enjoyed so many books. I mean, when I was in the bookshop, I read a lot of travel books. I thought Bruce Chatwin, actually. I loved Songlines, for example. And actually his book On the Black Hill, I thought was fantastic.